Imagine, right now, an archer pulling back a bowstring and releasing an arrow into the sky. You watch it arc through the air, heading toward its target. But what if I told you that, scientifically and logically, that arrow isn't actually moving?
I mean, it sounds like a riddle, right? But it's actually a completely serious philosophical proposition. If you freeze time to a single infinitesimally small microsecond, that arrow is just suspended in the air.
Right, it's just frozen there.
Exactly. It occupies a space exactly equal to its own length. So in that frozen instant, it is completely at rest.
Meaning, in that specific microsecond, it has zero velocity.
Yeah, zero.
Yeah.
And since time is really nothing more than a series of these frozen instants strung together, the arrow is always at rest. It never actually moves. The motion you think you're seeing is a complete hallucination.
Wow.
It's just a trick your brain is playing on you.
Well, welcome to the conceptual earthquake that is ancient philosophy. We've got another custom-tailored deep dive prepared just for you today, and we are completely ripping up the floorboards of your own mind.
We really are.
We're taking a massive foundational text excerpts from the History of Philosophy, Eastern and Western, Volume 2, and extracting the ultimate shortcut to understanding the absolute bedrock of human thought.
Right. And our mission today is to trace the greatest pivot in human history. We are looking at how our ancestors transitioned from explaining the terrifying randomness of the universe through, the temper tantrums of the gods.
Right, throwing lightning bolts and causing storms.
Exactly. Moving from that to using reason, logic, and pure conceptual deduction. And I want to stress, this isn't just a tour of dusty ruins. This is the origin story of the mental software you were using to process reality right at this very second.
Okay, let's unpack this. We are going to journey from the intense moral battlefields of the ancient Middle East across the Mediterranean to the mind-bending physics of the early Greeks.
The really mind-bending stuff.
Oh, absolutely. Up to the towering humanist peaks of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, and finally into this grand, turbulent collision where the ancient world tried to force cold, hard logic to sit in the exact same room as deep historical faith.
It's a huge journey.
It is. So where exactly does a journey like that even begin?
Well, it begins in the vast, rugged landscapes of ancient Persia around 1000 BC with a visionary named Zarathustra, or, as he's better known in the West, Zoroaster.
Zoroaster.
Yeah. And to really grasp the magnitude of what Zoroaster did, you have to put yourself in the shoes of someone living before him. Imagine living in a world where the Iranian religion was entirely based on nature worship.
So you're just at the mercy of the elements. You worship the fire, the sun, the storms, because, well, those are the things that can freeze your crops or flood your village.
Exactly. It's a totally transactional, almost terrified existence.
Right.
You sacrifice to the storm god so he doesn't destroy your harvest.
Right.
The gods aren't necessarily good or evil. They are just powerful and moody. There is no overarching moral architecture to the universe.
It's just chaos.
Total chaos. But then Zoroaster steps onto the stage and initiates a total paradigm shift. He introduces ethical dualism. He looks at the cosmos and says, no, there is one supreme Godhead.
And he calls him Ahura Mazda, right?
Yes, Ahura Mazda, which translates to the wise Lord. And Ahura Mazda is omniscient, completely transcendent, and most importantly, absolutely fundamentally good.
But hold on, I have to jump in here. If you propose that the creator of the universe is absolutely perfect and purely good, you instantly crash headfirst into the oldest philosophical trap in the book.
The problem of evil.
Exactly. If God is perfectly good, why did my child die of a plague? Why do wolves tear apart sheep? Where does the cruelty actually come from?
What's fascinating here is that Zoroastrianism was arguably the first system to directly confront and solve the problem of evil without compromising the goodness of God.
Okay, how do they pull that off?
Zoroaster taught that from the divine origin emerged two primeval spirits. They're often referred to as the twins. One is Bentamenu, the Holy Spirit, which embodies light, truth, and life.
Yeah.
The other is Angramenu, the evil spirit, the architect of darkness, falsehood, disease, and death. And here's the hinge upon which the entire philosophy turns. These two spirits chose their natures.
Oh, wow. So evil isn't just an accident. It's not a shadow or an absence of light. It is an active, living, independent force. Angramenu is essentially a cosmic terrorist who looked at a perfect creation and actively decided to infect it.
That is the crucial distinction. Evil is an active, stubborn reality. It's an invading force. And this framework completely protects Ahura Mazda from being the author of suffering.
Because God didn't create the plague.
Exactly. The evil spirit weaponized the plague to sabotage God's work. Now, if you connect this to the listener's life today, it changes everything about how a human being views their purpose.
How so?
Well, if the universe is literally a war zone between a good god and an invading evil spirit, what is your job?
Oh, I see. You're not just a bystander.
Right.
You are the infantry. You are a soldier drafted into a cosmic war.
Yes, and it demands your active, unrelenting participation. Zoroastrianism introduced this radical concept of human free will. You are not a pawn being pushed around a chessboard by fate or the zodiac. You are a free agent, and you must choose a side.
And you don't fight this war by retreating to a mountaintop and meditating in silence, do you?
No, not at all. You fight the evil spirit by planting crops, by raising a family, by telling the truth, by living vigorously. Action is your weapon.
You know, the source text has this incredibly vivid, almost haunting imagery for how this internal moral conflict plays out. It talks about a concept called the Dana, which loosely translates to conscience or religion.
It's a fascinating concept.
It really is, because it's not just a quiet little voice in your head telling you not to steal. The text says that the moment a person dies, they have to cross the Chinvat Bridge into the afterlife. And as they are walking, their Dana physically manifests and walks toward them.
It's one of the most brilliant psychological mechanisms in ancient religion. It externalizes the internal.
Right. If you were a righteous person, if you fought for truth and cultivated the earth, your Dana greets you in the form of a stunningly beautiful, radiant young woman.
And if you weren't,
If you were wicked, if you lied and chose the path of the evil spirit, your conscience greets you as a hideous, terrifying old hag. It is the literal, undeniable personification of every thought, word, and deed you ever committed. You can't hide from it because it is you.
you are forced to look your own morality right in the eye. But as profound as the Dana is, there's another spiritual faculty the Persians conceptualized that I find even more structurally complex.
Oh.
The Fravashi.
The Fravashi. I really want to spend some time here because the source describes it as a guardian spirit or a divine double. But the way it operates sounds remarkably like modern depth psychology.
It really does.
It sounds like an ancient framework for the higher self. How exactly does this divine double function? Because the text implies these spirits weren't forced into human bodies, they volunteered.
That is the underlying mythological narrative, and it's quite moving, actually. Before the physical universe was forged, Ahura Mazda created these spiritual intelligences, the Fravashis. They existed in supreme felicity and perfect heaven. They are the ideal eternal prototypes of every human being.
Okay.
When God decided to create the material world, knowing full well that Angra Mainyu would invade it and turn it into a blood-soaked battlefield, he actually consulted the Fravashis.
He asked them for permission.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
He asked them, do you want to remain here in eternal safety, or are you willing to descend into physical bodies to fight the evil spirit on the front lines?
And they actually chose to go. They volunteered to leave paradise, to come down into the mud and the pain, just to help the Creator win the war.
It is an act of ultimate voluntary exile. The tradition holds that when a child is born, its Fravashi accompanies the soul into the body. Now, the soul is your ego, is your everyday, stumbling, flawed consciousness.
Right, the part of us that messes up.
Exactly. But your Fravashi remains pure. It acts as an infallible monitor, a silent friend and guide. It applauds you when you strike a blow for the good, and it admonishes you when you fall for the lies of the evil spirit.
It's like having the absolute best, most perfect version of yourself acting as your lifelong cornerman in a boxing match. And this maps so cleanly onto modern psychoanalytic theory.
It's uncanny, isn't it?
It is. We all have the actual self, the person we see in the mirror who hits the snooze button and makes selfish choices, and the ideal self, the person we know we are capable of becoming. The Persians were codifying this thousands of years ago.
They absolutely were. And these intensely compelling ideas didn't just stay locked in the Persian desert. They were too potent. As the Persian Empire expanded, and later as the Roman Empire pushed east, these concepts began to leak westward and reshape European history.
Case in point, Mithraism. Mithra was an ancient Indo-Iranian god of light, oaths, and truth. By the time his cult migrated into the Roman Empire, it had transformed into a massive mystery religion.
It became the religion of choice for the Roman military. The legions worshipped him as Sol Invictus, the invincible sun.
And here's where history leaves its fingerprints on your daily life. The followers of Mithras celebrated his primary festival, the birthday of the invincible sun, on the exact day of the winter solstice.
Right, the darkest day of the year.
Because that's the day when the darkness peaks, the tide turns, and the days finally start getting longer again. The triumph of light over dark. And that date was December 25th.
Precisely. Centuries later, when Christianity became the dominant force in the Roman Empire and sought to unify the populace, they absorbed that massive cultural festival and repurposed it as the Feast of the Nativity. You simply cannot untangle modern Western calendars from ancient Persian theology.
That's wild, but there was another, much darker export from the Persian world, wasn't there? Manichaeism.
Yes.
Manichaeism.
This is where the dualism goes off the rails a bit, right?
You can definitely say that. In the 3rd century AD, a prophet named Mene emerged. He created a highly synthetic religion that blended Zoroastrian dualism with elements of Buddhism and Christianity.
Okay.
But Mene took the concept of light versus dark and pushed it to an absolute terrifying extreme. He equated the entire spiritual realm with light and God. But he equated the entire material world, including matter, nature, and the human body itself, with darkness and Satan, which is a complete betrayal of the original Zoroastrian idea. Zoroaster wanted you to embrace the physical world, to farm it, to have families, to be strong.
Yes, the original Persians hated asceticism. But because Mani believed matter was inherently evil, Manichaeism demanded severe, punishing asceticism, mortification of the flesh, strict celibacy, extreme fasting.
Brutalizing themselves.
Exactly. You had to punish the body to free the light trapped inside it. And while Manichaeism eventually died out as an organized religion, its philosophical DNA survived.
It is a St. Augustine.
Exactly. Before he became one of the most important theologians in Christian history, Augustine was a Manichaean for nearly a decade.
I always forget that.
Yeah, and even after he converted, that deep-seated suspicion of the physical body, the association of the flesh with sin, and the intense anti-materialism of Manichaeism bled into his Christian writings. And through Augustine, those ideas profoundly shaped the entire moral architecture of the Middle Ages.
So the Persians give us this heavy cosmic framework, a universe defined by a moral war between good and evil, light and dark. But as human beings started sailing, trading, and observing the natural world more closely, a completely different kind of question started to bubble up.
They stopped looking purely at morality.
Right. They stopped asking, how do I fight the evil spirits? And started asking, what is this rock actually made of? Why does the wind blow?
We are crossing the Mediterranean now. We are leaving the moral battlegrounds of the East and entering the intellectual laboratories of Ionia on the coast of Asia Minor. This is the era of the pre-Socratics.
And what happens here is nothing less than the invention of science.
It really is. And to understand how radical this was, you have to look at the Greek mindset before this moment.
Right. If you asked an average Greek in 800 BC, why did it rain today? Or why did that volcano erupt? The answer was entirely based on Homeric myth.
Zeus was in a good mood, or Hephaestus was hammering his anvil under the mountain.
Exactly. The universe was a giant soap opera of the gods.
It was entirely capricious. But then, in the bustling trade city of Miletus, around 600 BC, a group of thinkers look at the stars and the sea and declare what we call the autonomy of reason.
A huge moment.
They decide that the universe is not a chaotic playground of the gods, but an ordered cosmos governed by physical laws that human beings can actually figure out.
The Milesians. They were the original materialists. They were obsessed with finding a vera causa, a true natural cause. They asked one massive question. What is the primary substance? What is the single foundational building block that everything else is made of?
Thales is the first man to step up to the plate. He is widely considered the father of Western philosophy. He looks at the complexity of the world and boldly declares that the primary substance of everything is water.
Water.
Everything, ultimately, is just a form of water. He also observed that magnets could move iron, so he concluded that magnets have souls.
Okay, I have to be honest. To a modern listener, hearing that the father of philosophy thought rocks had souls and everything is made of water sounds, well, kind of ridiculous. It sounds like a child's hypothesis.
It does, if you judge him by the standards of modern particle physics. But you have to look past the what and examine the how and the why.
Okay, why was Thales' idea brilliant?
Because water is the only substance in the ancient world that a person could easily observe transforming into all three states of matter. They saw ice melt into a liquid, and they saw water boil into a vapor. Thales wasn't just guessing, he was observing transformation.
Ah, I see. He was looking for a single underlying unity beneath the diversity of the world. He was saying, the universe makes sense.
Yes, the specific answer, water, was wrong. But the question he asked, and the method he used to answer it, created science. and his successors immediately began refining his theory.
Right. Anaximenes comes along.
Yes, and Anaximenes comes along and says Thales was close, but it's not water. The primary substance is air.
And Anaximenes introduces a really crucial mechanical explanation for how air turns into everything else. He doesn't just say it's air, he explains the process.
He introduces the concepts of condensation and rarefaction.
Let's ground those terms for the listener. Basically, he's talking about density, right? Like packing people into a room.
That's a great way to look at it. Anaximenes argued that when air is rarefied, when it's spread out and thin, it becomes fire. When it condenses or packs tightly together, it becomes wind.
Okay.
Pack it tighter, it becomes a cloud. Tighter still, water. Pack it incredibly tight and it condenses into earth, and finally stone.
That is a staggering leap in logic. He is suggesting that qualitative differences, the difference between a hot fire and a hard rock, are entirely caused by quantitative differences. It's just the same stuff packed at different densities. That is basically the foundation of modern chemistry.
It is remarkably sophisticated. But then the third great Milesian, Anaximander, pushes the logic even further into the abstract.
What does he do?
He looks at Thales' water and Anaximenes' air and says, you both have a logical flaw. Yeah, he says, if the universe is fundamentally made of one specific element, say water, it would have absorbed all its opposites by now. Water is inherently wet and cold, fire is dry and hot. If everything was basically water, the fire would have been extinguished millions of years ago.
Oh, that makes sense. So what is Anaximander's solution? If the base code of the universe can't have specific qualities, what is it?
He calls it the apeiron, the boundless, or the infinite. He argues that the primary substance must be an indeterminate, eternal, indestructible, and boundless mass.
So it's just raw stuff.
Exactly. It has no specific qualities of its own. It is just raw, infinite potential. And out of this boundless mass, the specific opposites, hot and cold, wet and dry, separate out to form the world we experience. He realized that the foundation of reality had to be something completely alien to our everyday senses.
So the Milesians kick off this great search for the primary substance. But the moment they do, they stumble into a massive philosophical pothole that splits Greek thought in half. The problem of change.
The big one.
Right. If everything in the universe is fundamentally made of one eternal, indestructible thing, how does anything ever actually change? How does an acorn become an oak tree? How does a child grow old?
This question produced two titans with completely opposite answers. First, you have Heraclitus of Ephesus. He looks at the world and concludes that stability is an illusion. The only constant in the universe is change.
He's the one who famously said you cannot step twice into the same stream.
Exactly.
Because by the time you put your foot in the second time, new waters have flowed in and even you are slightly different.
Precisely. For Heraclitus, the primary substance isn't water or air, it's fire. But he doesn't just mean literal flames. Fire represents an ever-living perpetual flux. Fire is never static. It only exists by constantly consuming fuel and giving off smoke. Reality, for Heraclitus, is a dynamic process. The world is a verb, not a noun.
But then, swinging to the absolute furthest extreme in the other direction, we get a group called the Eleatics, Parmenides, and his star pupil, Zeno, the guy with the arrow from our introduction.
Right, the frozen Arab.
Parmenides looks at Heraclitus and says, you are completely wrong. Parmenides uses pure, unforgiving logic. He says, if something exists, it is. It cannot not be. Therefore, you cannot get something from nothing, and something cannot turn into nothing.
So Parmenides concludes that being is a completely full, continuous, unmoving, static sphere. There is no empty space.
None at all.
None. And if there is no empty space, there is nowhere for anything to move. Therefore, change, motion, time, birth, and death, they're all complete illusions perpetrated by our flawed senses. Reality is a giant, frozen, eternal block.
This is such a wild moment in human history. Parmenides is basically saying, if my math and my logic contradict what my eyeballs are seeing, then my eyeballs are lying to me. He elevates pure logical deduction over physical observation, and Zeno steps up as his attack dog to prove it with his paradoxes.
Zeno's goal was to show that the concept of motion is mathematically absurd. Take the paradox of Achilles and the tortoise.
Oh, this one is classic.
Achilles, the fastest runner in Greece, races a slow tortoise, but gives the tortoise a 10-meter head start. Zeno mathematically proves Achilles can never catch it.
Let's walk through the trap for the listener. Zeno says by the time Achilles runs that 10 meters to where the tortoise started, the tortoise has moved ahead, say, 1 meter, so Achilles is still behind.
Right.
By the time Achilles runs that 1 meter, the tortoise has moved ahead 10 centimeters. By the time he runs the 10 centimeters, the tortoise is 1 centimeter ahead.
Ad infinitum. Because space is infinitely divisible, you have to cross an infinite number of points to get anywhere. And you cannot complete an infinite series in a finite amount of time. Therefore, motion is impossible.
It's infuriating because our common sense screams that Achilles just runs past the tortoise, but Zeno forces you to prove it mathematically. It's like Zeno is looking at reality like a flipbook. In frame 1, Achilles is here. In frame 2, he is there. The movement is just the brain blurring the static frames together.
Now, Zeno's math was eventually defeated centuries later when we developed the calculus of infinitesimals, which allows us to calculate how an infinite series can converge to a finite limit. But philosophically, he dropped a bomb on Greek thought.
Total destruction of basic assumptions.
Exactly. After Parmenides and Zeno, you couldn't just assume motion existed. You had to invent a physics that proved how it existed.
And that leads to the next wave of thinkers, the pluralists, who are desperately trying to unfreeze Parmenides' universe. A guy named Empedocles steps up. He says, okay, Parmenides is right that you can't create or destroy matter, but he's wrong that there's only one substance. Empedocles says there are 4 roots of reality: earth, air, fire, and water.
And crucially, he has to introduce a mechanism to make them move and mix. He introduces 2 cosmic kinetic forces, love and strife. Love acts as a gravitational pull, drawing the elements together to create objects. Strife acts as a repulsive force, tearing them apart to cause decay and destruction.
I always wondered why he used emotions, love, and strife to describe physics. Why anthropomorphize gravity?
Well, because the Greeks hadn't fully separated physics from psychology yet. They didn't have the concept of an impersonal mechanical force like electromagnetism. But the conceptual leap is what matters. Empedocles successfully separated matter from the force that moves matter. That is a massive breakthrough.
And Anaxagoras takes it even further. He says it's not just 4 elements. Everything is made of an infinite number of microscopic seeds. And the force that organizes them isn't an emotion like love, but nous, which translates to mind or intellect.
Yes. For the very first time in Western thought, Anaxagoras introduces a pure, incorporeal, rational intellect that acts upon physical matter to create order out of chaos. The universe isn't just moving, it is being intelligently organized.
And all of this brilliant, chaotic speculation culminates with the atomists, specifically Democritus, writing around 400 BC. If we connect this to the bigger picture, Democritus's leap of imagination is one of the greatest intellectual achievements in human history. With 0 scientific instruments, using only his mind, he predicts modern atomic theory.
Democritus solves the Parmenides problem beautifully. He says reality consists of only 2 things, the full and the empty. Atoms and the void.
The void.
Right. The atoms are infinite in number, invisible, indestructible, and they come in different shapes and sizes.
Yeah.
And they are perpetually falling and crashing into each other within the infinite emptiness of the void.
When they crash and their shapes interlock, they form trees and dogs and stars. When they break apart, things die and decay. But he makes this one specific distinction that I find mind-blowing. He separates the properties of things into primary and secondary qualities.
This is the genius of Democritus. He realized that not everything we experience actually exists in the object itself.
Let's use an analogy for you listening. Imagine you are holding a lemon. Democritus would say that the lemon's weight, its density, and its round shape, those are primary qualities. They actually belong to the atoms making up the lemon.
Right.
But the bright yellow color, the sour taste on your tongue, the citrus smell, those don't exist in the atoms.
Actually, it's even stranger than that. Democritus argued that sweet and bitter, hot and cold, color and sound, they're entirely subjective. They're just the result of the physical atoms of the lemon colliding with the physical atoms of your eyes, your nose, and your tongue. Your brain creates the yellow and the sour.
Wow.
The universe itself is totally silent, colorless, and tasteless.
He stripped all the myth, all the purpose, and all the poetry out of the universe and reduced it to pure, cold mechanics. Atoms in the void, which is incredibly modern.
It is.
But there's a problem. All this talk of atoms and void leaves a gaping hole in the human experience. If the universe is just blind rocks crashing together in the dark, what happens to justice? What happens to morality or the soul?
And this is the exact crisis that brings us to the golden age of Greece. We are taking the humanist turn. The pre-Socratics spent 200 years looking up at the stars and down at the dirt, arguing over water, fire, and atoms. But eventually the Greeks realized the most baffling, dangerous, and urgent puzzle wasn't out there in the cosmos. It was inside the human mind.
This shift begins with a group of traveling intellectuals called the Sophists. The Sophists looked at the last 2 centuries of science, Thales saying it's water, Heraclitus say everything is changing, Parmenides saying nothing is changing, and they basically threw their hands up.
They gave up on science.
Yeah, they became skeptics. They said science is a dead end. It can't give us absolute truth.
The most famous of the sophists was a man named Protagoras,
Yeah.
and he utters one of the most famous sentences in all of philosophy. Man is the measure of all things.
Man is the measure of all things, of things that they are, and of things that are not that they are not. It sounds profound, but practically speaking, what does it actually mean?
It is the ultimate declaration of relativism. Protagoras is saying there is no objective reality independent of human perception. If the wind feels cold to you, the wind is cold. If the wind feels warm to me, the wind is warm. We are both right. What is true for you is true for you, and what is true for me is true for me.
Which is fine if we are talking about the weather. But the Sophists applied this to morality and politics. They were highly paid tutors who traveled from city to city, teaching young, ambitious Athenian politicians how to argue any side of a case. They taught that laws, justice, and right and wrong were not universal truths, they were just social conventions, customs made up by whoever was in power.
And this relativistic, cynical view of truth severely threatened to dismantle the foundations of Athenian democracy. If justice is just a matter of opinion, and whoever speaks the most persuasively gets to define it, society descends into a chaotic power struggle.
Enter Socrates.
Yes, Socrates.
I always try to picture the contrast here. You have these wealthy, polished sophists charging exorbitant fees to teach rhetoric, and then you have Socrates. He never wrote a single word down. He was poor, he walked around barefoot, and according to the text, he was notoriously ugly. He had a flat, pug nose and bulging eyes.
Not exactly a polished politician.
Not at all. He just wandered the markets of Athens, cornering arrogant people and asking them annoyingly simple questions until their entire worldview collapsed.
Socrates was the absolute antidote to the sophists. He vehemently refused to accept that truth was merely subjective opinion.
Yeah.
He believed with his entire soul that behind the shifting, messy, relativistic opinions of men, there were objective, universal truths waiting to be discovered. And his weapon of choice was the search for definitions.
Right. You would walk up to Socrates and say, that general is a deeply courageous man. And Socrates would stop you and say, my friend, you know what a courageous man is. But tell me, what is courage itself?
And you would give an example. You'd say, courage is standing your ground in the phalanx and not running from the enemy.
Right.
And Socrates would reply, but what about a cavalry commander who fakes a retreat to pull the enemy out of position and then destroys them? Isn't he acting courageously by running away?
And suddenly your definition falls apart. You realize you've been using a word your whole life without actually knowing what it means. Through this relentless peeling the onion questioning, what we now call the Socratic method, he forced people to abstract the universal concept from the specific examples.
He wasn't trying to embarrass them, though he often did. He was trying to find the eternal essence of virtues like temperance, justice, and piety. Because Socrates held one foundational radical belief: virtue is knowledge.
Now, I have to push back on this because this is where Socrates always loses me. He believed that if a human being truly authentically knows what is right, they will automatically do what is right.
Yes.
He literally thought that nobody does evil willingly, they only do bad things out of ignorance. But, I mean, that goes against all observable human behavior. We all know people who know exactly what they are doing is wrong, and they do it anyway. Addiction, greed, malice. The Romans even had a famous proverb, I see the better, I follow the worse. Was Socrates just hopelessly naive about human psychology?
It's a very fair critique, and Aristotle later criticized him for the exact same thing. But to be fair to Socrates, we have to understand what he meant by the word knowledge. He didn't mean memorizing a rule from a book. He didn't mean superficial awareness.
What did he mean then?
He meant a profound, soul-deep, existential realization of the good. He believed that if your soul fully grasped the reality and beauty of what is good, it would be as impossible for your will to choose evil as it would be for your hand to intentionally hold on to a red-hot piece of iron. For Socrates, moral failure is always fundamentally a failure of understanding. You think the evil thing will bring you happiness, which is a cognitive error.
Oh, I see. And he absolutely lived this philosophy to the very end. He claimed he was guided by an inner demon, a divine voice. But strangely, the text notes it never told him what to do, it only warned him what not to do.
Right.
He viewed himself as a gadfly. Athens was a large, lazy, well-bred horse, and the gods had sent Socrates to bite it and sting it away.
And predictably, the horse eventually swatted the fly. Athens, humiliated by his questioning and suspicious of his influence over the young aristocrats, put him on trial for corrupting the youth and introducing new gods.
His trial and execution are the defining martyrdom of Western thought. He could have easily compromised, he could have paid a fine or accepted exile. But he stood before the jury and maintained that the unexamined life is not worth living.
He chose to drink the poisonous hemlock rather than abandon his search for truth. He proved, with his life, that some truths are objective and worth dying for. He totally demolished the sophists' relativism.
And the trauma of watching the wisest, most just man in Athens be executed by a democratic vote profoundly scarred his greatest pupil. It galvanized him. That pupil is Plato. If Socrates was the spark, Plato was the forest fire.
He certainly was.
Plato takes Socrates' humble search for moral definitions and scales it up into a staggering, all-encompassing architecture of reality known as the theory of forms. Let's really dig into the forms, because if you don't understand this, you don't understand the next 2,000 years of history.
Absolutely.
Socrates was just looking for the definition of justice. Plato argues that the concept of justice, or the concept of beauty, or the concept of a circle, are not just mental abstractions floating inside our human brains. Plato says they are real. In fact, they are more real than the physical world we are sitting in right now.
Exactly. Plato proposes a radical dualism. He splits reality into two distinct realms. First, there is the visible world, the world of the senses. This is the world of physical chairs, physical dogs, and physical human beings.
Right.
But everything in this visible world is flawed, changing, decaying, and temporary. As we said before, you can draw a circle in the sand, but it will never be perfectly mathematically round, and eventually the tide will wash it away.
But then Plato says there is a second realm, a supersensible, invisible, eternal realm of forms or ideas. Up in this realm, there exists the perfect form of the circle, the form of the dog, the form of justice. These forms are eternal and unchanging.
And the only reason a physical dog exists down here in the mud is because it loosely imitates or participates in the perfect form of a dog up in the ether.
The physical world is nothing but a blurry, flawed photocopy of the ideal world.
Yes. And at the very top of this hierarchy of forms, ruling over all of them, is the idea of the good. Plato compares the idea of the good to the sun. Just as the physical sun gives light to the physical world so our eyes can see objects, the idea of the good radiates intellectual light onto the realm of forms so our minds can comprehend truth.
Here's where it gets really interesting and a bit frightening. Plato doesn't just leave this as a metaphysical thought experiment. He applies this entire theory of perfection to human psychology and politics in his absolute masterpiece, The Republic.
He does.
He starts by analyzing the human soul, dividing it into three parts.
Yes, the tripartite soul. Plato argues we are composed of reason, which seeks truth, and knowledge spirit, which is the seat of our passions, courage, and desire for honor, and appetite, which seeks base physical desires like food, comfort, and sex.
Okay.
A mentally healthy, just individual is someone whose reason is firmly in control, guiding the spirit, which in turn polices and disciplines the appetites.
And then Plato makes this monumental leap. He says, let's take this model of the soul and write it large. Let's design the perfect state. He argues that a perfect society should perfectly mirror the three parts of the soul.
Right.
So his ideal state has three rigid classes. The appetites of the state are the masses, the farmers, merchants, and artisans who produce the wealth. The spirit of the state is the soldier class, the auxiliaries who defend the city. And the reason of the state, that must be the guardians.
The philosopher kings. Plato believed that because only the philosophers have trained their minds to escape the illusions of the physical world and grasp the eternal forms, most importantly, the idea of the good, they are the only ones possessing the true knowledge required to steer the ship of state.
Now, we absolutely have to address the radical politics Plato institutes for this guardian class. We're going to look at this neutrally, just following his cold logic to its endpoints. Because to ensure these philosopher kings rule purely for the good of the state, without any corruption or self-interest, Plato completely strips away their humanity.
It's quite extreme.
He institutes absolute communism for the ruling class. No private property, no gold, no mansions. But he goes much further than property. He abolishes the biological family.
He does. Plato viewed the traditional family unit as the ultimate root of selfishness, nepotism, and societal division. His logic is straightforward. If a ruler has a private life and biological children, his loyalties are split. He will inevitably use his political power to hoard wealth and privileges for his own offspring, putting his family above the state.
So to amputate that temptation, Plato proposes a communism of wives and children for the guardians. It's essentially state-controlled eugenics.
Yes, it is.
He proposes that the state orchestrates secret mating festivals. They pair the bravest, smartest men with the bravest, smartest women to breed the highest quality citizens, exactly the way a farmer breeds champion hunt dogs. And the moment the children are born, they are immediately taken away to anonymous state nurseries.
No mother knows which child is hers, and no child knows who their parents are. As a result, every child considers every adult of their parents' generation to be their mother or father, and every child of their own generation to be their brother or sister. The biological family is dissolved to force a universal statewide family.
It is entirely focused on unity at the expense of individuality, but it is fascinating that because he completely dismantled the traditional family and the role of the wife managing the household, Plato accidentally became centuries ahead of his time on women's rights.
He really did.
He explicitly argued for the total equality of the sexes within the guardian class. If a woman demonstrated the philosophical and physical capacity, she would be educated naked in the gymnasium alongside the men, she would fight in battle, and she could absolutely become a philosopher queen.
Plato's Republic is a stunning, brilliant, and rigid utopia.
Hmm.
But Plato was a realist in one sense. He knew the average citizen, the farmers and soldiers, wouldn't easily understand or accept why these strange, ascetic philosophers should have absolute power.
So what did he do?
Well, to explain the philosopher's journey and justify their rule, he crafts what is arguably the most famous and powerful metaphor in all of Western thought, the myth of the cave.
This metaphor is so potent it still gives me chills. I want everyone listening to visualize this. Imagine a dark, subterranean cavern. Deep inside, a row of prisoners has been chained by their necks and legs since the day they were born.
They cannot turn their heads.
Right. They can only stare straight ahead at the blank back wall of the cave.
Behind them, higher up on an incline, a large fire is blazing. And between the fire and the chained backs of the prisoners, there is a raised walkway, like a puppet theater screen. People walk along this walkway carrying various objects, statues of animals, shapes of trees, tools.
The light from the fire casts the shadows of these objects onto the wall in front of the prisoners. Now, because these prisoners have been chained there since birth, these flickering, two-dimensional grayscale shadows are the only reality they have ever known.
It's their entire world.
When they hear echoes in the cave, they think the shadows are speaking. They probably have contests to see who is best at predicting which shadow comes next. They build their entire culture, their ego, their whole world around these illusions.
But then, one prisoner is unexpectedly freed. His chains are struck off. He is forced to stand up, turn around, and look directly at the fire. It is agonizingly painful for his unadjusted eyes.
He's confused.
Very. He realizes the shadows were just tricks of the light. But it doesn't stop there. He is then dragged violently up the rough, steep, jagged ascent, completely out of the cave, and thrust into the surface world.
Into the blinding sunlight. At first, he is completely overwhelmed. He has to look at reflections in the water, then at the physical trees and animals themselves. And finally, his eyes adjust enough that he can look up into the sky and behold the sun itself.
The sun represents the idea of the good.
Right. He suddenly comprehends that the sun is the source of all life, all seasons, all reality. He has achieved true philosophical enlightenment.
And here is where Plato delivers the tragedy of the philosopher. Having seen the ultimate truth, the freed man pities his former friends still chained in the dark. So he makes the descent back down into the cave to free them.
But his eyes are no longer adjusted to the darkness.
Exactly. He stumbles. He can't compete in their shadow-guessing games anymore. He looks like a fool.
And when he tries to explain to them that their shadows are fake, that there is a real world of color and light up above, they think he is insane. They conclude that leaving the cave ruined his eyesight.
And Plato explicitly writes that if you tried to unchain them and drag them up to the light, they would kill him, which is exactly the story of what Athens did to Socrates.
It is a profound meditation on the danger of truth. The cave represents the unexamined life, the realm of uncritical opinion, sensory illusion, and societal conditioning. Exiting the cave requires painful effort, rigorous education in mathematics and logic, and tremendous courage.
It's not an easy journey.
Not at all. I look at this ancient metaphor today, and I genuinely wonder, have we ever left the cave? Or did we just upgrade it? You look at modern life. Millions of people staring transfixed at glowing screens, addicted to algorithm-driven social media feeds that feed them exactly what they want to see.
living inside partisan echo chambers.
Exactly, arguing furiously over curated digital shadows. We literally buy VR headsets to strap the cave directly to our faces. Are we just a society of chained prisoners obsessing over high-res shadows?
It's an incredibly valid modern application. The mechanisms of illusion have changed, but human nature hasn't. But Plato doesn't end his philosophy just with the struggle in this life. He introduces another myth at the very end of the Republic to explain the ultimate cosmic stakes of this philosophical journey, the myth of
Yes, the myth of is a Pamphylian soldier who is killed in battle. But 12 days later, as he is lying on his funeral pyre about to be burned, he wakes up. And he tells everyone what his soul witnessed in the afterlife.
It is a massive vision of cosmic justice, heaven, hell, and reincarnation. Describes a system where souls are judged. If you lived wickedly, you are sent into the earth for 1,000 years of tenfold punishment.
Okay.
If you live justly, you go up to the heavens for 1,000 years of bliss. But after the 1,000 years, all the souls gather in a meadow for a cosmic lottery. They draw lots, and based on their number, they get to choose their next life from a massive pile of destinies scattered on the ground, lives of kings, beggars, animals, athletes.
And the crucial lesson of the myth of is that most souls make terrible choices. Watches a soul come down from heaven. This soul had lived a conventionally good life in a well-ordered city, but he only did it out of habit, not true philosophical understanding.
Right.
So when it's his turn, he sees the life of a wealthy, powerful tyrant and greedily snatches it up without examining it. Only after he chooses it does he realize the destiny includes a fate where he is doomed to eat his own children.
It's a horrifying realization. Plato's point is that superficial, conventional goodness won't save you in the long run. Only the soul that has rigorously practiced true philosophy, the soul that intimately knows the nature of the good, has the clarity to carefully navigate the lottery of reincarnation and choose a life of justice, moderation, and wisdom.
Philosophy isn't just an intellectual hobby, it is the survival skill of the eternal soul.
Absolutely.
There is one more aspect of Plato's Republic I have to push back on because it drives me crazy. Plato famously uses his ideal city to banish almost all poets and artists. He kicks out Homer and the dramatists. His logic is that art is just an imitation of an imitation.
Yes. In Plato's framework, the form of a bed made by God is the ultimate truth. A physical bed made by a carpenter is a flawed copy of that form, and a painting of a bed made by an artist is a copy of the physical bed. Therefore, art is 3 times removed from reality.
Plus, he says poetry stirs up the irrational emotions, making men weep or laugh instead of maintaining rational control. But why this intense, almost puritanical hatred? Why banish artists, the very people who bring beauty and empathy into the world?
Well, you have to understand the culture Plato was fighting against. In ancient Greece, Homer and Hesiod weren't just considered entertainment, they were the encyclopedias of theology, history, and morality. But if you actually read Homer, the gods lie. They cheat, they rape, they murder, and they play favorites.
That's true, they behave terribly.
Plato believed that if art feeds the irrational passions and presents these false, immoral images of the divine to citizens, it corrupts the soul and destabilizes the state. Plato loved beauty, but he believed true beauty was found in the cold, perfect order of mathematics, geometry, and the eternal forms, not in messy, emotional, dramatic fiction.
So Plato spends his life building this magnificent, perfect, eternal, slightly terrifying world up in the clouds of his intellect. But he had a student, a man who studied in Plato's academy for 20 years. And the student looked at Plato's magnificent cloud city and decided it was time to bring philosophy crashing back down to solid earth.
We are talking about Aristotle.
The first scientist, the great organizer, the master of those who know.
Aristotle represents a fundamental shift in philosophical temperament. If Plato is the mystic and the poet, gazing up at the heavens trying to glimpse eternity, Aristotle is the marine biologist, crouching in the tidal pools, cutting open a fish to see exactly how its organs work.
The famous Renaissance painting by Raphael, The School of Athens, captures this dynamic perfectly. You see Plato, the older teacher, walking forward and pointing a finger straight up to the sky to the invisible realm of forms. And right next to him is Aristotle, younger, holding his hand flat, palm facing down, pointing firmly to the earth. Because Aristotle looks at Plato's separated realm of perfect forms and essentially says, with all due respect to my teacher, this makes absolutely no sense.
Aristotle's primary critique of Plato is devastatingly practical. He argues that multiplying the world doesn't help explain the world. If you want to understand the nature of a physical horse, hypothesizing that there is a ghostly, perfect form of a horse floating in another dimension doesn't explain how the physical horse eats, how it moves, or how it reproduces. It just adds an unnecessary layer of complication.
Aristotle completely rejects the dualism. He says there is no form of a tree floating in the ether. The treeness is in the oak tree right in front of you. He argues that the form of a thing exists inside the individual object itself.
Exactly. For Aristotle, reality isn't split into shadows and internal ideas. Reality is composed of individual physical substances, and every substance is an inextricable combination of matter and form. Matter provides the potential, form provides the actuality.
Let's break that down. A block of raw marble is matter. It has the potential to become many things. The shape of the god Apollo, carved by the sculptor, is the form that actualizes that potential, turning it into a specific statue.
And to rigorously explain how anything changes from potential to actual, Aristotle invents one of the most powerful analytical frameworks in history: the four causes. He argues that if you want to truly scientifically understand anything in the universe, you must be able to answer four specific questions about it.
Let's run a real-world object through Aristotle's four causes to show how this engine works. Let's use something intricate. Let's use a grand piano.
A grand piano is a perfect test subject. The first question is the material cause. What is the substance it is made of? For the piano, the material cause is the wood, the steel strings, the cast iron frame, and the ivory keys.
Okay, the second question is the formal cause. What is its design, its shape, its essence? This isn't just a pile of wood and wire. The formal cause is the specific schematic, the tension of the strings stretched across the soundboard, the mechanical leverage of the hammers, the exact acoustic shape of the case. It is the blueprint of piano-ness.
The third question is the efficient cause. What is the kinetic agent that actually brought it into existence? Who or what did the work? In this case, it is the piano maker in the factory, cutting the wood, casting the iron, and assembling the parts.
And finally, the fourth and most important question for Aristotle, the final cause. What is its telos? What is its ultimate purpose or goal? Why does it exist at all? The final cause of the grand piano is to produce beautiful music when played by a musician.
And Aristotle didn't just apply this to man-made tools. He applied the final cause teleology to all of nature. He believed the entire universe was goal-oriented. The telos of an acorn is to become a mighty oak tree. The telos of rain is to nourish the earth. Everything is striving to actualize its potential.
But if you follow that logic, if everything is in motion, moving from potential to actual, driven by a cause, you run into a mathematical wall. A causes B, B causes C, C causes D. You can't just trace that chain back to infinity. There has to be a starting gun. So Aristotle deduces that there must be a first cause.
Yes, Aristotle calls it the unmoved mover. Through pure logical deduction, he proves that there must be an eternal, unchangeable, absolutely perfect entity that initiates all motion in the universe, but which itself is not moved by anything else.
But wait, if it's not moving, how does it push the universe? Does it reach out and spin the galaxies like a top?
No, and this is where Aristotle's God is wildly different from the God of the Bible. The unmoved mover doesn't physically push anything. It moves the universe by attraction.
Like a magnet.
More like an object of intense desire. Imagine a saucer of milk in a room and a cat walks in. The milk doesn't actively reach out and pull the cat. The milk just sits there, perfectly being milk. But the cat is drawn to it by desire.
That makes sense.
Aristotle's unmoved mover is pure immaterial form. It is pure actuality, with zero unfulfilled potential. It is pure thought, thinking only about the most perfect thing itself. And the entire cosmos, the stars, the planets, nature, is drawn into circular motion out of sheer love and desire to imitate the perfection of the unmoved mover.
It is a totally deistic entity. It didn't create the universe. The universe has just eternally existed alongside it. It doesn't know you exist. It doesn't answer your prayers. It doesn't care about your morality. It just is. It is the ultimate object of cosmic gravity.
It's a breathtaking piece of metaphysical deduction. But Aristotle wasn't just a philosopher of the cosmos. He was obsessed with organizing human life. He practically invents the science of biology, he invents formal logic and the syllogism, and he writes the ultimate grounded manual for human behavior, the Nicomachean Ethics.
Which asks the greatest question, what is the final cause of a human being? What is our telos? For Plato, the goal of life was this mystical, almost religious contemplation of the idea of the good. But Aristotle brings it right down to earth. He introduces the concept of eudaimonia.
Eudaimonia is frequently translated into English as happiness, but that's a weak translation. It doesn't mean a fleeting feeling of joy because you ate a good meal. It means human flourishing. It means well-being, success, and realizing your full potential as a rational creature.
And how do you achieve eudaimonia? Through virtue. But Aristotle's definition of virtue is totally different from Socrates. Socrates said virtue is just intellectual knowledge. Aristotle says, no, knowledge isn't enough. Virtue is a habit. You don't become a brave person just by understanding the definition of courage.
Right?
You become a brave person by forcing yourself to do brave acts over and over until the habit becomes your character.
Aristotle views virtue almost mechanically. He introduces his famous doctrine of the golden mean. He argues that every virtue is a midpoint, a mean between two extremes, the extreme of excess and the extreme of deficiency.
Let's use courage as the example again. It's brilliant. If you have a total deficiency of courage, you are paralyzed by fear. Your vice is cowardice. But if you have a massive excess of courage, if you fear absolutely nothing and charge blindly into a hopelessly outnumbered battle, your vice is recklessness or rashness. True courage is finding the exact, rational, calibrated midpoint between those two extremes, tailored to the specific situation.
The same formula applies to everything. Temperance is the mean between being totally numb to pleasure and sensibility and being a slave to your appetites, self-indulgence. Generosity is the mean between being a stingy miser and being wastefully extravagant. Virtue is the bullseye of rationality.
It is incredibly practical. It's a system you can actually use in your daily life. But then Aristotle takes all these perfectly calibrated virtues and combines them to describe his ultimate ideal of a human being, the high-minded man or the magnanimous man. And I have to be honest, reading the source text description of this guy, he sounds insufferable.
He is certainly a jarring figure for modern readers. Let's look at the traits.
The text explicitly says the high-minded man claims much and deserves much. He looks down on his inferiors. He loves to confer benefits on people, but he fiercely hates receiving favors because receiving a favor implies he is dependent and inferior. He walks with a slow, dignified gait. He speaks in a deep, measured voice, and he doesn't care about men's praise, but he demands respect. To modern ears, especially after 2,000 years of Christian influence, this guy sounds incredibly arrogant. Where is the humility?
It is a massive cultural contrast. You have to realize that for the ancient Greeks, humility was not a virtue at all. Humility was considered the vice of the weak, the poor, and the slavish. The ultimate Greek ideal was our excellence. The high-minded man is someone who actually possesses extreme greatness, and more importantly, he knows he possesses it, and he claims the exact honor he mathematically deserves.
So for Aristotle, fake modesty is actually a vice.
Yes. To claim less honor than you deserve is a defective character that Aristotle calls small-mindedness. The high-minded man is an aristocratic ideal. He is the summit of self-sufficient, proud, rational perfection. It is completely divorced from the Judeo-Christian exaltation of the meek, the humble, and the broken.
Which provides the most perfect transition imaginable. Aristotle represents the absolute towering peak of Greek rationalism. The universe is categorized, it is logically ordered, it is driven by a cold, impersonal, unmoved mover, and humanity's highest goal is a proud, rational self-actualization. But history is driven by collisions.
It is.
What happens when this hyperlogical, contemplative Greek framework collides head-on with the intense, action-oriented historical faith of the Middle East?
That collision sparks an entirely new intellectual epoch. We are moving into the final leg of our journey, Jewish philosophy, and the grand synthesis of faith and reason.
The geographic center of gravity shifts entirely. Following the conquest of Alexander the Great, Greek culture spread across the world. And as the Jewish people were dispersed, philosophy moves into the diaspora to cosmopolitan cities like Alexandria in Egypt, to Babylonia, to the Iberian Peninsula. And here, Jewish thinkers are faced with a monumental, almost impossible tension.
They are caught between two fundamentally opposed worldviews that they deeply respect. On one side, you have Greek philosophy. As we've seen, the Greek ideal seeks a timeless, changeless eternity. Its highest goal is the contemplative life sitting in stillness and reflecting on the eternal forms or the unmoved mover. God, for the Greeks, is static perfection.
But on the other side, you have the biblical worldview, which is entirely different. Biblical religion is based on a God who is passionately active in time and in history. A God who creates the physical world out of nothing, who physically speaks to prophets from burning bushes, who parts seas, who dictates laws, and who demands right action in the streets, not just right thinking in an academy.
The prophets of Israel weren't philosophers trying to logically deduce the essence of being. They were fiery activists, shouting about justice for the widow and the orphan, and warning of God's immediate judgment. The tension is obvious. How do you synthesize the active historical God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob with the cold, static, rational God of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle?
The first massive, heroic attempt to fuse these worlds happens in the 1st century AD with a man named Philo of Alexandria. Philo is a fascinating figure. He's a devout Jew living in a heavily Hellenized Egyptian city, and he is deeply in love with both the Torah of Moses and the dialogues of Plato. He fundamentally believes that Greek philosophy and Jewish revelation are ultimately pointing to the exact same truth.
But to fuse them, Philo has to solve a major architectural problem, the absolute transcendence of God. Both Plato and the Bible agree God is transcendent. But Philo argues that God is so utterly transcendent, so completely other and pure that he cannot possibly interact directly with the messy, decaying physical matter of our universe.
But the Bible says God created the physical world. So how did he do it if he can't touch it?
To bridge that infinite gap, Philo introduces a concept that changes the course of Western theology. He introduces the Logos.
The word, reason, the divine blueprint.
Yes, Philo takes Plato's realm of perfect ideas, which Plato thought existed independently, and Philo says, no, the ideas are not independent. The ideas are the thoughts existing inside the mind of God, and the total sum of all those divine thoughts is the Logos.
I see.
The Logos is God's first emanation, his first creation. It is the active agent, the intermediary between the unknowable God and the physical universe. God doesn't touch matter directly. He creates and governs the world through the Logos.
Which is an absolutely staggering historical pivot, because if you open the New Testament and read the opening of the Gospel of John, written just a few decades after Philo, it famously says, "In the beginning was the Word, the Logos, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." Philo's attempt to synthesize Moses and Plato literally provided the philosophical vocabulary for the foundation of Christianity.
It is a direct intellectual lineage. Philo also introduces heavy mysticism into the tradition. He writes about a light stream emanating from the Logos that human beings can perceive, not with their physical eyes, but with the eye of the soul. He is actively shifting Judaism away from purely historical action and heavily toward Greek contemplation.
But the story of Jewish philosophy doesn't stop with Philo's mysticism. We skip ahead several centuries to the 10th century, deep into the Islamic Golden Age. The intellectual center has moved to Babylonia, and we enter the era of the Kalam, the rationalist theology.
And the towering giant here is Saadia Gaon, the head of the Rabbinic Academy. Saadia was not a mystic staring at light streams. He was a hard-nosed, relentless rationalist. Saadia Gaon believed in the supreme power of the human intellect. He argued that if a person uses reason correctly, they can logically deduce all the fundamental necessary truths of religion without any divine help. Reason alone can prove that God is one, that God is just, that God created the world, and that we must act morally.
Okay, I have to stop you because this raises an incredibly obvious, massive question. If Saadia truly believes that human reason and logic are powerful enough to figure out the truth of God and morality entirely on their own, then why do we need the Bible? Why do we need the Torah or Revelation at all? If Aristotle can figure out God using physics, isn't Revelation totally redundant?
It is the central defining tension of Saadia's entire philosophy. And his answer is brilliantly, almost shockingly pragmatic.
What does he say?
He says, yes, theoretically, human reason can eventually reach the ultimate truth. But human reason is heavily flawed. It is prone to negligence. We get distracted by our bodily passions, we get confused by bad arguments, and frankly, philosophy takes a really, really long time to master.
So if humanity had to wait for every single peasant and farmer to study 20 years of metaphysics to become an Aristotle just to figure out basic morality, society would collapse into a murderous purge on day one.
Exactly. So what is revelation? Revelation is a shortcut. Think of human reason as a brilliant but easily distracted detective working on a massive, decades-old, incredibly complex murder case.
I love this analogy.
The detective absolutely has the skills and the intellect to solve it, but it might take him 50 years, and he might follow 100 false leads along the way. Revelation is God simply walking into the police station and handing the detective the completely solved case file.
That is fantastic.
It gives humanity the vital answers immediately, ensuring that society doesn't lose its way and can function morally from day one. But, and this is Saadia's most important point, once God hands you the shortcut, you don't just stop thinking. You have a religious duty to open the file and use your reason to understand why the answers are true. Faith provides the destination, reason paves the road behind it.
Faith is the answer key at the back of the math textbook. It saves you from failing the test, but God still expects you to do the homework and show your work. It's a beautiful balance. And the synthesis project keeps evolving. In the 11th century, we moved to Spain to a brilliant poet and philosopher named Solomon ibn Gabriel.
He writes a massive, influential book called the Fons Vitae, The Fountain of Life.
And he wrestles with the ultimate mechanical question. How does an utterly spiritual, invisible God create a purely physical, dense, material world?
Ibn Gabriel attacks this using the framework of Neoplatonism. Now, we need to ground this term. Neoplatonism views the universe not as something God built with his hands like a carpenter, but as a hierarchy of emanations pouring out from the one.
Let's clarify emanations. Are we talking about something like a light bulb radiating light or a fire radiating heat?
That is the exact analogy. Imagine God as a blazing infinite fire. The fire doesn't choose to give off heat, it just naturally radiates heat because of what it is. The closest circle of heat is the hottest and brightest. That's the highest spiritual realm. As the heat radiates further and further out into the cold room, it gets weaker and weaker until finally, at the very furthest edge, it freezes into dense physical matter.
But there's a massive theological danger there for a Jewish thinker, because if creation is just an automatic emanation, like heat radiating from a fire, it means God didn't choose to create the world. It means it's totally deterministic. A fire doesn't have free will. But the God of Genesis is a God who actively says, "Let there be light." He chooses.
And that is exactly where Ibn Gabriel makes his genius move. He refuses to accept a God without free will. So, to fix the Neoplatonic machine, he introduces a new central gear, the divine will. He argues that the will of God acts as the crucial bridge, the formative, active principle between the unknowable essence of God and the matter of the universe. It is the active will of God that freely catches the emanations and shapes them into forms.
He even takes Aristotle's hard concepts of matter and form and injects them straight into the spiritual realm. He argues that absolutely everything in the universe except God himself, even the highest angels and spiritual intellects, is composed of a combination of spiritual matter and spiritual form.
It's an incredibly daring harmonization. He takes the rigid biological categories of Aristotle, he takes the mystical radiating heat of Neoplatonism, and he injects the active, choosing, willing God of the Bible right into the center of the engine to make the whole thing run. And this profound Jewish philosophical endeavor to harmonize Athens and Jerusalem, to prove that reason and faith are not enemies but siblings, set the stage for the entire intellectual explosion of the Middle Ages.
It heavily influenced Islamic giants like Avicenna and Averroes, and it provided the blueprint for Christian titans like Thomas Aquinas.
It really built the modern world.
Okay. Let's step back, take a breath, and look at the epic, staggering scope of what we have just traversed in this deep dive. In the span of an hour, you, the listener, have journeyed through the absolute bedrock of human consciousness.
We really have covered a lot of ground.
We started in the harsh Persian deserts with Zoroaster, who shattered the old mythologies and told us that the universe is a moral war zone, and you are a drafted infantryman equipped with a divine conscience, forced to choose between the light and the dark.
Right.
We then crossed to the Ionian coasts, where Thales and the pre-Socratics proclaimed the autonomy of reason, looking at water, air, and infinite seeds, until Democritus stripped the universe down to pure, blind atoms crashing in the void, forcing us to ask where meaning comes from.
Then we walked the dusty streets of Athens with Socrates, tearing down the cynical relativism of the sophists to prove that objective truth exists.
We were dragged painfully out of Plato's cave to stare at the blinding, eternal forms of the good, realizing that the physical world is just a shadow play.
And we analyzed the nuts and bolts of reality and human flourishing with Aristotle, cataloging the four causes and finding our balance in the golden mean.
And finally, we witnessed the grand synthesis, the heroic, centuries-long struggle of Jewish philosophy to harmonize the timeless, logical contemplation of Greek reason with the historical, fiery, action-oriented faith of biblical revelation. Why does all of this ancient history matter to you today?
Because it isn't history.
Exactly. Every single debate you are going to have this week, whether you are arguing with a coworker about the ethics of artificial intelligence, debating a politician's morality, arguing over whether truth is subjective, or lying awake at night wondering if your life has a final cause, you are running the mental software that was painstakingly programmed by these ancient minds. You are using Plato's forms, Aristotle's logic, and Zoroaster's dualism, whether you realize it or not.
Which leaves us with one final provocative thought.
Let's hear it.
If Plato was right, that we are all prisoners, chained in the dark, staring at shadows on a cave wall, And if Protagoras the sophist was right that man is the measure of all things, what happens in our very near future when artificial intelligence becomes the measure of things?
Yes.
When an artificial superintellect begins generating the news, the art, and the reality we consume on our screens, will the machines we create become our new unmoved movers, dictating our purpose from above? Or are they simply the newest, most seductive, high-definition shadows flickering on the cave wall, keeping us happily chained in the dark?
That is something for you to ponder long after this deep dive ends. Until next time, keep examining the shadows.